The time is just gone 17 minutes past 9 as we continue with the broadcast. News and views this morning. Still to come on the show, we've got Imtiaz Syed, Chairperson of eThekwini Secure, standing by. We've got the Head of Head of Fund Development at Islamic Relief South Africa, Abdul Alim Hamza, coming through with us. And towards the end of the broadcast, a special tribute to the late marhum Dr. Farooq Mir, rahimahumullah, inshallah. We've got Dr. Faisal Suleiman from SAMNET, and also we've got human rights and climate justice activist Dr. Kumi Naidu, who will be paying tribute to this great legend at the forefront of the apartheid struggle. And he was named as a man of courage, and really, Dr. Farooq Mir deserves this tribute this morning, coming to you live right here on Salam Media. But right now, we're going across to be joined by Imtiaz Syed. Imtiaz, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, United. Thank you for having me.
Yes, just before the news break, we were talking about a different issue, but again, it's about peaceful coexistence within communities. And we know with the elections that are coming up, always a hot topic. It can actually end up in a volatile environment. It can create a lot of problems. And we know that KwaZulu-Natal in particular has always been a hotbed in terms of political differences within parties and in the build-up to the elections. This is so important, irrespective of who you are affiliated to, which party you're going to be voting for. At the end of the day, it requires people to act responsibly, even in the build-up to this election, Imtiaz.
Absolutely. I think, United, we need to speak to about the true meaning of democracy. And democracy basically speaks to us having freedom of expression and our freedom to do as and when and what we wish. As society by far and by large, right? Now, the problem that we face generally as we run up to generally the national elections, we don't really see too much of this during local government elections, but during national elections, because of political affiliations, we find that there tends to be a lot of warring around issues that communities face. And then we find ourselves sitting with protest action and roads being blocked and freeways being blocked and all of these things. And I want to take us back to the civil unrest that we had, which was basically an insurrection, and that wasn't based even on the fact that there was an election, but it was just based on something that was transpiring within KZN. Now, I'm speaking to this to try and preempt what might happen, but without causing any fear. Let's be very clear in that, right? To say that when we come to 2024 elections, we must realize that there's great talk of the ANC not being a majority and all of these things. What would that bring to the table? There's going to be quite a lot of protests along the way, incited, obviously, for particular reasons, because ultimately when you instill fear into people, then people don't go out to vote, and they build apathy, and they do all of these things. Now, this is important for us to understand. What are we as communities at grassroots level doing? Now, the concern for me personally is that when we find unrest or when we find that there's a road being blocked, all we find is that there's people on WhatsApp saying that this is happening. What is the action plan and what is the game plan for society by far and large in terms of protest? And this is something very, very important. We need to curb it as soon as it becomes something. So as soon as there's a fire starting somewhere, we need to be responsive immediately and we need to start getting there. How do you go about doing this? Your CPF is your platform, your community policing forum. Now, I know there's many talks around the issues of CPFs. You know, some people don't like the CPF chairperson and all of that. It's not the time to be discussing your internal issues. It's time to use the platform for the purpose and intent that it was created. Join your CPF, get onto the CIB program, have those channels of communication open with all law enforcement agencies, whether it's your local municipality, Metro Police, whether it's SAPS on the other hand with POP and all of those things, but start creating those platforms of engagement so that when something does happen, there's immediate response to it, it's curtailed immediately, and those things stopped immediately so that it doesn't escalate into something that we cannot control any longer. And this is the importance of the message that I bring today, United.
Well, it's a very important message, but also at the same time, we know that people are very, very passionate about certain things. People are very passionate about their political parties that they are affiliated to and what they
Mm.
stand for. But that when that passion translates into irresponsible behavior, when it translates into disrupting people's lives, whether it's through protest action, roadblocks, all of that, there lies a problem.
Yes,
And key issue is how does one actually react, and if we react irresponsibly as well, it leads to a
correct. Sir.
volatile situation. And this is where we've seen, especially in the build up to the elections, even some politicians actually taking advantage of the situation and inciting the type of antagonism, for want of a better term.
The thing about it, Inayat, is that ultimately we are governed by the law. And many of us need to understand what the law prescribes in terms of illegal gatherings, protest action, trespassing, all of these things. And the only way you learn these things is if you're sitting in CPFs and you're asking those pertinent questions to law enforcement. What is our response plan in terms of protest? What do we do? But also to give you an understanding, Inayat, there's been a very useful tool that some of us don't use, and that is our phone cameras. It's very important when protests are happening that we start taking out our phones and we start recording these things. Like it can be used against you, it can also be used against those that portray and start pushing these agendas of violence against communities by far and large. So it's important for us to have these things evidence based. It cannot just be hearsay, I saw this person or I heard this or whatever it is. When you're seeing protest action, don't fear. Go out in the front line and be there, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's your community that you need to look after. Now, no am I saying that you should go into it where there's a flame and burn your vehicle and do all of those things. I mean, if it's getting volatile, step back a bit, but make sure you're recording these things, and make sure we as community and society, through the platforms you have, open up cases, open up charges, because if there's no charges, there's no investigation. For example, and I'll give you this in understanding, if someone goes down on Alpine Road and they block off the road, who opens up that case? Government doesn't go and open up a case against the community. It's the rest of the community that need to go to the station as a collective, whether it's a ratepayers association, whether it's a civic body, whether it's a religious organization. And if you feel that your rights in this country have been infringed, then you go down to the police station and you open up that case so that there can be an investigation and things can continue in that path. We tend not to use the law. I mean, we see daily people are getting robbed, but no one goes and reports those crimes. So these are important tools that we need to start learning how to use. And if we know how to use these tools, we tend to curb these things and we start engagements around the issues that we face as society and as communities.
Just looking at organizations like yourself, eThekwini Secure, and also CPFs and other community-based organizations, from now in the build up to the elections, what should we be doing? I mean, surely that there's got to be some levels of engagement in terms of informing people, but more importantly, in terms of educating people what to do, and how to react to situations.
United, I shy away from speaking about this, but ultimately, as a country, we've got to be very realistic and honest with ourselves. Are we on the brink of racial tensions? Do we have racial tensions so into us that it can spur a little trigger? I mean, you see it all the time in stores, in shops, everywhere we go. A simple slur, I mean, the other day we were in council and someone said, these people. A simple word like these people trigger things that bring back apartheid. And we need to be very careful as society as to how we speak and what we say. Them, these, all of these things. Now you can trigger something within your community very, very quickly. It could end up within into a racial issue and tend to go out that way. We need to firstly understand that we live in society all together as one. That's the most important thing. Whoever is out there trying to incite violence and trying to build racial tension amongst us, we need to start speaking to each other and we need to start coming together in terms of that. But more importantly, what is your mobilization strategy in case of a spur or a spark within your community that has triggered something? Remember, these are very simple incidents. It could be a child at school that had been spoken to by their teacher that said something that was untoward based on tradition. And ultimately, that leads into an entire community coming down on their teacher or an entire community against another community. Remember, we live collectively. In eThekwini at the moment, we've got 595 informal settlements that are located strategically within suburbs. And predominantly, these are African males or African females that live in these informal settlements. And on the other side of the token, you've got Indians and whites living there. The racial tension is there every day. You get people not understanding the issue of sewage. You get people not understanding the issue of garbage. And these things create major, major triggers in community. It becomes very volatile when you go in with an attitude of saying we are now the aggressors or the oppressors. We need to understand the plight of the people, but we also should not be condescending in the way we approach these situations. But based on that, we need to engage with SAPS at our local stations. What is your emergency response plans in case of xenophobia, in case of protests, in case of these things? Is it something that we're going to think about when it occurs and come up with a plan, or do we have a response plan? Like you see in any business or any proper running institute, you'd find that there's a fire evacuation plan. Every single community needs to have that fire evacuation plan in terms of what we're going to be facing for the elections coming up next year. And this is important. I can't really go into exactly what your plan is because I don't know the leaders in your community. I don't know your go-to people in terms of crime-related issues. But where are the security companies? What is their portfolio? How do they come together in terms of unrest? Because remember, when you're going out, there might be 3 policemen in the police station that have shotguns, right? That have rubber bullets. But you're facing a crowd of 200 to 300 people. By the time you call out POP and do all of those things, you have a bit of a problem. But with the CIB program, ultimately what happens is that CIB members with SAPS can take command of SAPS. You can take command from SAPS, your local security companies, and they can start acting and start putting up those barricades and saying no more and enough is enough. So we need to start learning how to develop these plans and get these plans together so that we can start pushing back at any type of criminality that faces society, irrespective of race, color, or creed.
Well, Imtiaz, a lot of food for thought as we head towards the elections in terms of what you are saying and what we need to be aware of. And I'm sure we will be discussing a lot more over a period of time and as we get closer to the elections on these particular matters. But for now, Jazakallah for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Imtiaz Syed, Chairperson of eThekwini Secure with us this morning. We're going to go for a break. We come back. We'll be joined by Abdul Alim Hamza, Head of Fund Development at Islamic Relief South Africa.